We hope you enjoyed part one of the discussion with Dylan and Holly from Q Games. This is part two coming up right now. Well, I want to sort of pick up on this next chapter, but I just want to jump across to Holly for a moment. So I'll just give you a breather for a moment, Dylan. So Holly, from your experience, we're sitting here listening this incredible story that Dylan's been through and all these amazing adventures he's had as sort of chapters of his career. But how are you, I wanted to sort of understand from you a bit more, how are you feeling 6 months into working in Japan? You've both already mentioned what an international place Kyoto is, and so you've got that very rich mixture of an international community there, and you're obviously working in a fairly sort of international open work environment at Q Games, and I'm aware you've got Dylan sitting next to you, but what's your feeling, your observations about culturally what it's like working in Japan from those first 6 months? Not necessarily just the environment you're working in, but any observations you make. Are there anything you could share with us that you've picked up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it leads on really nicely from what Dylan has just been saying, actually, because I'm not sure if Q Games is the kind of stereotypical Japanese experience, because hearing all the things that Dylan's saying that he hated about working in the US are what you don't find at Q. So he's talking about a sterile working environment and everyone being in cubicles. Like, we don't have that. We have a really open office plan and everybody collaborates with each other, and it's not what I'd expect. It's not what I would expect from the stereotypical kind of Japanese working environment, but I knew that coming here that Q wasn't like that. You know, there's a really great mix of both sides. And it's funny because people ask me all the time, my friends from home say, oh, it must be so weird, like working in Japan, it must be so strange. And I really have to kind of rack my brains and think, what is there that is challenging or difficult? The obvious one is the language barrier, right? That is the obvious one, and that's never going to go away unless you get better at the language, which is something that I'm working on. But aside from that, there really aren't too many other challenging things. For a funny story, the biggest thing for me was the first time I came to the office. I don't think I've told you this story before. The first time I came to the office, we entered the Genkan, which is like the entranceway.
Oh, yeah.
And people were taking off their shoes.
Oh.
And I was like, I take my shoes off at work.
Right.
And then Kazama-san, who looks after everyone in the office, was like, yeah, did you not bring slippers? And I was like, no, I didn't bring any slippers. And she explained to me, oh no, you must bring some slippers. Everybody takes their shoes off at the door. And it's such a small thing but it is such a big cultural difference. And I think that is the example. There are lots of very small things that are very different, but they're great. And I love learning them. I love people take longer lunches here, which isn't a thing in the UK. Like taking a 2-hour lunch is kind of normal. There are lots of very small things, but nothing to me that has been monumental in terms of like, oh, it's been a big hurdle to get across or something that is very challenging, if that makes sense.
And also, by the way, even visitors have to take the shoes off as well. So
no shoes allowed.
No. So that not all Japanese companies do that, by the way. And I learned the reason why I started doing that is because when I was at Nintendo, people wear their shoes at Nintendo, but there was a company that was like embedded in Nintendo, because Nintendo kind of embeds a lot of companies into their offices, the people they work with closely. And there's this company called SRD, and they had the floor below us. And I went to visit them, and they had a shoeless environment, and it blew my mind. I was like, this is so cool, because shoes are painful, your feet get hot, and it, it's just uncomfortable. You want, when you get home after working with your shoes on all day, you just want to get your shoes off, right? First thing. But here we don't have the shoes on in the office, so it's just, you just feel much more comfortable, and it's just such a simple idea.
And these little things, when you first hear about it, as Holly was describing it, it does sound really strange when you first hear about it. But actually, when you peel it back and think about it, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
It really does.
But I mean, and it is a small thing. But that was, for me, the big thing was like, oh my God, I work in Japan because I have to take my shoes off. And it sounds really crazy and really silly when I say it, but it's true. And that's obviously the language barrier, number one. But aside from that, everybody here works, in very similar ways to how they work from my experience in the UK. It's just, we're in a different country completely on the other side of the world.
Well, there's a third one, isn't there? Learning to ride a bicycle.
learning to ride a bicycle.
Like,
yeah,
because everyone does ride bicycles here, so something you remember. When you're a kid, you may have ridden a bicycle,
right,
or
yes.
if you like bikes, of course. There's a lot, obviously, as a hobbyist, but in general, the general public in the UK don't ride bicycles. But here, like, everyone rides bicycles.
Yeah.
Sure.
No matter what age you are.
I found that out on my second day here when someone from Q was like, "Hey, we're going to show you around Kyoto." I was like, "Oh, awesome! How?" And he was like, "Oh, on a bike." And I was like, "Oh no, really? On a bike?" He was like, "Yeah, can you ride a bike?" I was like, "Maybe. It's been a while."
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a fun thing about Kyoto. I think it's easy to get around on a bike, and everybody does it. So
yeah, exactly.
It sounds great. And I was just wondering, Holly, when you were talking about the culture of the slippers and turning up on the first day and being asked if you brought your slippers, Q Games haven't got one of those Nintendo style factory worker jackets, have they? Q Games.
we sometimes make t-shirts. We have a few t-shirts. Yeah, we sometimes have t-shirts. Yeah.
I mean, that's probably something that might be interesting to people outside of the games industry. I'm not exactly sure who's listening, but if you don't work in the games industry, it might be quite surprising that when
you have these blazers.
You just wear your clothes. You wear any clothes you want to wear. There isn't really a games industry uniform per se. I know Nintendo kept that going for a while in Japan.
In Japan they still have the blazers at Nintendo. So.
Yeah. I think it is. I've obviously seen those jackets and those blazers that you're talking about, and I think there are some deeper issues around that, aren't they? Because that's part of building that culture of kind of conforming and being part of something bigger, isn't it? That's
like a school uniform, right? It's like a school
I guess uniform. It is. It's a version of a school uniform, and I think again it touches on some of those points, those differences we spoke about earlier of the sort of long-term view of being part of something versus a slightly freer spirited mind that us Westerners tend to generally have. These are really interesting little observations, and no right or wrong either way, right? It's just good to see the differences, understand the differences.
What can be annoying though, so from when you're running a business, one annoying trait about that, or to do with that, is that new recruits want to join a big name company. So it's not like the UK where you kind of look around for a grassroots type company, you just kind of go for it and try and it doesn't have to be a huge company. But in Japan, it's almost like a matter of pride to get into a big company. It's almost like getting into a university. And so quite often, when we're looking for people, or maybe we find like a really good programmer who interned. Well, we did have one who interned with us, and he's with us for 6 months, and he did a great job. Really good, really nice guy as well. We at the end we took him out and said, we'd like to offer you a job, and he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, even before I started the internship, I'd already applied for and got accepted for a job at Nintendo. It's a year in advance of leaving university." So he was interning with us for the last 6 months of university, and we were like, "Ah." We said, you're just going to be swallowed up. You're going to go into Nintendo. Obviously, it's Nintendo, so it's a great sort of prestige thing. But like, you're just going to be swallowed up in there, and we still keep in touch with him. So he's still a sort of a friend of Q Games in a sense.
I think that's a really interesting point, though, about Japan and indies versus AAA and the differences between the West and Japan, because I know from my very short 1-year experience of working in Japan, it seems that the idea of indies and smaller teams of developers that are making games, it isn't as prominent as it is in the West. And I think there's a lot of stigma around what it means to release a game in Japan as an indie. And seeing it firsthand, there aren't too many obstacles to get through, but I completely understand how it looks from the West, because I was there and I've seen it, and I've worked for developers and for publishers who have been in that position and decided against publishing in Japan because it looks scary, or it looks expensive. We don't understand, we don't know the market.
That's why we made we founded a big event called Bit Summit in Kyoto, which we just had its 10th Bit Summit actually, so it's on its 11th year or so now. And it grows every year. It's this big event, and we wanted to kind of get in touch with all those more independently minded people of the games industry, and kind of bring them all into one spot, and also mix in a whole load of sort of foreign influence as well. Like publishers from the West or indies from the West as well. And we kind of put them all into this massive like conference hall. And it's got to the point now where even Nintendo and Sony, have booths in there as well, like quite big booths, and other companies as well. But
and they're showing indies, right? They're showing indie games. Like PlayStation and Nintendo are showing up to an indie event in Japan.
Yeah.
And they're showing indies. Like that is something that you would never have seen. And like what Q have done with Bit Summit is really amazing. And again, not saying that because Dylan is sitting here. But it's true. And I think that's had such a big impact on the industry in Japan as a whole.
So one bit of advice for any I don't know, business that is having trouble finding people or getting people together is to start a conference. Just set up a conference and get people to come to you. Because until then, everybody was going to Tokyo as well for the Tokyo Game Show, which isn't really geared for our kind of like independent sort of gaming industry. And they're all going there, and no one's really like matching up there at all. Like you couldn't really meet anybody there that was really influential or that could help you. With Bit Summit, it just created this really good like collection of people, and everybody just every year, like it just grows. It's great. So a bit of business advice there. I mean, it's it's a bit of hassle to do an event like that, but they mostly run in the black as well. So like you begin to get sponsors, they begin to grow, so the event itself runs in the black. So that's great. And at the same time, everybody's coming to you now, or everybody's coming to your town. And that's brilliant. Even the big players, it's great.
Did you, when you started the first one, I think you said 10 or 11 years ago, did you have a view at that time it would become an annual thing and it would grow this big, or did you just try it as a one-off to see how it went?
One-off, and it was so successful, and it's just it was quite small, the first one, but we managed to get like so much press and so much attention, and it seemed like there was like this big like hunger for that kind of event, and so we grew it bigger. We doubled the size and kept growing after that, and it created a really good community as well, like just a really good community of people.
And are you seeing any trends changing at all? Are there more sort of smaller startup Japanese independents coming along in your sector, or are you seeing some trends of change there?
Oh yeah, definitely. So primarily because of Bit Summit, it kind of gave people who show there, it gave them like the idea that, maybe we can just start a small company, get a bit of funding from somewhere, or an investor even. It gave people a way to connect to investors as well, because investors come as well, like big investors like Tencent, and these sort of big Chinese investors also come along to the show, and they basically managed to find it gave them like the confidence to kind of go, oh, these other people are doing it as well. Okay, we can do this. And then people start, and there's foreigners have started up their own little independent companies or studios, but also the Japanese as well. They just instead of going into these big companies, they'll just go, okay, no, we're going to start up a small little company, 3 or 4 people, and just see where it goes right out of university. So it's great. It's created this nice little hub. It's like a little hub of entrepreneurism.
I think it's also a bit of a domino effect, right? There's a domino effect of that community starts to grow, and then the publishers start to notice, and the platform holders start to notice. And I've noticed working in publishing, as even when I was working in the UK, I'm still looking at opportunities for publishing games in Japan, and kind of seeing, is it possible? How do we do it? And in the past 12 months alone, we've seen changes with the Japanese rating board. So they've lowered the barrier to entry for indies. Well, for anybody who's releasing a digital-only game, you can now do an IARC rating. So this is for rating games based on, is it for children aged 6 and above, or anything like that. You can now get a rating for Japan for free, for no cost. It's a self-cert rating, so you don't have to submit anything. And previously, before that, you were having to submit a long form rating only in Japanese directly to Zero. And realistically, that's not possible unless you have someone who's a Japanese speaker, who's part of your company. If you're based in Japan, or you're working with a publisher who specializes in working and releasing games in Japan. So I think it's definitely, we're seeing a domino effect of the indie scene is starting to grow. publishers are noticing, platforms are noticing, the rating holders are noticing and saying, hey, do you know what? We want more of you on our platform.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
How exciting. Yeah, so some of those barriers and challenges that would have previously made it so difficult are now beginning to disappear and come down, and things are
absolutely.
That's so exciting to hear. Yeah. And, well done you guys for the role you've played by getting this conference and seminar going and obviously contributing to that and making that happen and facilitating that. I always find that sort of stuff so rewarding, right? Above and beyond what we do day to day for our job and getting our income, to create bigger picture things like that. It's such a rewarding thing to do. So. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, Dylan, I just wanted to come back to you again now, and you picking up the story again. So you told us how you had your few years in the US. You then maneuvered your move back to Japan, although it was to Tokyo initially with Sony Corporation. And the bit I'd like to understand now is, and we're sort of touching on entrepreneurialism in this sector. So what was the bit of the story where you decided to step out of the corporate world and go back and set up your own company and grow Q Games? What's the story behind that part?
Yeah, so I was in Tokyo for about 3 years, and I enjoyed my time there. I just had this like lingering kind of like love of Kyoto. I think I just really liked one of the main things I remember at the time when people asked me about this was in Tokyo. Tokyo's very much sort of like B2B, or sort of very business oriented sort of city, whereas Kyoto's a much more sort of community social kind of city, I find. And so Kyoto ends up being, I think, a bit more creative in a sense. And you actually find that there are a lot of famous Japanese companies who actually have their headquarters in Kyoto. So like Nintendo is one of them, right? But there's actually quite a few others like Kyocera and Omron. There's big electronics companies as well, Shimazu, just a whole bunch of big companies here, and that's because I think Kyoto is a good place to like plant seeds and kind of have things grow into something new. It's like a good sort of growing kind of feeling. And in Tokyo, you kind of felt that it was already set up. Like it was either, unless you're going to open up like a new cafe or something, setting up a new like business in Tokyo, there are just so many other businesses already set up that you don't feel like you're new enough, or you don't feel like you're it doesn't feel like there's enough room to grow in a way. I mean, there is, but I mean, I just felt Kyoto had a much more sprouting feeling. It's kind of what I'm trying to get across. So I ended up thinking, okay, I can either stay at Sony, and I'll probably be there for like, the next next 10 or 20 years or whatever, or I can actually do what I was planning to do from a very young age, which is start a game studio. So when I was like 13 or 14, I'd always be like drawing logos and, like deciding what name my company would be, or, the studio would be. So, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it now. And instead of doing it in Tokyo, I might as well just bite the bullet and just go down to Kyoto and just do it there, because I didn't want to create the company in Tokyo and then have to move it, because eventually I would definitely want to be in Kyoto. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to do it all in one go. And I just basically, ran with it. I got a little bit of help from Sony because I went to basically one of the executives at Sony. And I said, look, I kind of want to go and start a studio in Kyoto. And he goes, okay, how much money do you need? But it was like for a project. So I said, okay, I've got this project I want to make. And he goes, okay, we'll fund that initial experiment. That's fine. So they actually funded, not a huge amount of money, but like they funded like this little project to kickstart the company. And they also introduced me to like an accountant and because they had, they're a big corporate company, right? So they had lists of like accountants that are okay to use, like okay, proper account, like good accountants. And so they said, okay, here's a list, choose one of these guys and we'll introduce you to this guy. So we chose a good accountant and set up the company, incorporated it in Kyoto, which is pretty easy. You just have to pay the solicitor fee, I suppose, which at that time was about 300,000 yen, which is I don't know what it is in pounds right now because of what the exchange rate is, but and that was pretty easy. It was all cut and dry, just really easy to do. Went round, we found an office to rent. That was easy as well. That all worked. Very, very smooth experience, really. And my Japanese wasn't that good at that point. I mean, I could speak it, but it wasn't as good as it is now by a long shot. I mean, this is 20 years ago. And we measured all this. Then basically for the first year, we just started like reaching out on at that point, sort of the fledgling kind of internet, trying to find people and get people in. And we grew to about 10 people in that first year, just bit by bit. So we got a few good people in, and basically built the company from there. From that point onwards. But there was no real difficulty to setting up the company at all. That was a surprising thing. I thought it'd be a bit harder. Oh, sorry, can't hear you there.
Left myself on mute. Sorry about that. Those initial hires that you got, those first 10 or so people, were they locally employed Japanese staff members, or did you bring some internationals in at that time? Or
we brought a few international peoples and also some Japanese as well. Not there were maybe only one or two people from actual Kyoto itself, because basically we kind of used our Sony, well, the fact that we'd been at Sony as well, to kind of like reach out to people who are like connected to Sony in some way, or had seen what we were doing at that point. So they kind of, because we were such a small company, right? So they'd have to have quite a lot of guts to kind of join us at that point, really. But we found a good little group of people,
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that, going back to your point you made earlier, a great point about how a lot of the, young, bright Japanese graduates want to go and join the big corporates and have that sort of long-term career view. So therefore, I know from experience myself, when you start your company in Japan, trying to hire good quality talent into a small startup, Western style company, not easy, right?
No. And it's still very hard now even, but it was much harder back then. We managed to get a couple of good UK guys from the UK through our contacts as well, from the UK games industry. They were pretty good. And that helped as well. So it's like a mix. Even at that point, we were quite an international kind of mix, maybe half Japanese, half foreign.
And it's interesting to me too that you're so modest in the way you say that it was relatively easy to do. I'm sure it probably was a bit more challenging than that, but I guess one of the key points for you is you had got a lot of experience of living in Japan. You had your relationship with Nintendo, you'd worked with Sony, you'd obviously got some support from Sony when you set your business up. So there's an interesting learning point, I think, for anyone listening to this discussion that may be looking to set a business up in Japan. Somehow having a bit of a footprint or some experience or some contacts or relationships out there, clearly that was what I guess made it a lot easier for you. And that probably reflects, Holly, on what you were saying a bit earlier about your journey into Japan. It's all been a little bit smoother because you've got Dylan and Q Games and that local support and infrastructure there. So there's an interesting learning point, I think, for people listening in to think about those steps you can do before you go out and set up.
Just to connect to that. So I can clearly remember the point in time where I realized how important networking is, and it's basically when I went to Sony America. So when I was at Nintendo, I was just very much, we're all in Nintendo. Nintendo's a very private company, so you don't really get to meet anyone from any other company or anything like that. But when I joined Sony was a much more broader company, and I learned the power of just talking to people. Because they had Sony liked to do like parties and stuff at that time, like everybody just get together, like 1 million PlayStations were sold, it's like really early, so 1 million PlayStations, and now it's huge numbers, but like the original PlayStation, and so we had, okay, let's have a party, so we'll have a party, and then at those parties, because it was still quite a small group, there'd be some very influential people who just come to the parties, and you just start talking to them, and even now I still. Even though some of them have retired from Sony, even I still kind of know them and still sometimes talk to them even on Facebook and stuff like that. And so we still have that connection from all the way back then. So networking is really, really important, I think. And Sony, that's one of the biggest things that Sony America taught me, especially Sony America, that whole American kind of everyone just interconnects.
Yeah. getting to know people, building relationships, investing time and effort into those relationships, maintaining them. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, it is another big
talked a little bit.
Yeah,
I was going to say, you talked a little bit earlier about Japanese relationships, business relationships, especially being long-term, right?
Yeah.
And you started out working on a Star Fox game, and how many years down the line at Q Games, then you're working on 2 Star Fox games again.
Exactly.
Within Q Games. So I think that goes to show that even that original meeting, right, and having that interaction all those years ago had an impact on Q Games all the way down the line.
It's a great point. It's a great observation, Holly. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, very long term. Yeah, very long term.
Yeah. In terms of the journey since you went out, you stepped out on your own, Dylan, and started Q Games. I mean, has it all been one big happy story since then, or have you had some challenging work through? You know, what's your overall view on that? The good times and the bad times over the last 20 years or so?
Yeah, so there were a few, little difficult times. So, for example, after the first year, the management changed a little bit at Sony, the lower management, and so we stopped working with them for about 8 months. There was no income there's no projects available for about 8 months, and so we suddenly had to kind of scramble around and kind of use all our contacts and all that networking to kind of find new work, and we did. We found some good. We were talking to like Microsoft and people at Microsoft, and we did some work for Microsoft, and then Sony came back to us and said, "Oh, we've got this other stuff to do. So can you do this?" And we started doing that. So it all started building up again. So there are a few points like that over the course of the years, but in general, nothing too hard. I think you just always have to be hustling a little bit, I think, to make sure, because we're fully independent, so there's no internal investors. It's like 100% owned by me for the past 21 years, and that's quite a difficult challenge in these days. But it means you always have to be hustling a little bit and always have to try and find interesting new work. And one of the things also I did over those 21 years is I made sure that any work we got in, that we had some very strong interest in that work itself. So we weren't just doing work for hire at all during those years. Even though if some of the work we may have done, like say for a company like say Konami or Bandai Namco or something like that, but the actual work we're doing is something we're actually personally very interested in doing, and that's kind of why we accepted those kind of contracts as well. But I found that was a very good way to kind of keep a solid bottom line of income, while also doing a sort of independent games development as well on top of that.
Yeah, it's another great point, isn't it? And I think we all know that if you can, for any of us that can carve out a career doing something that we're very passionate about and we enjoy doing, and we're inspired by and motivated by, what a great place to be in, right? And then you do give it your all, then, don't you? Because you are sort of mentally and emotionally invested in what you're doing, and you get happiness from it. So it's another great tip actually for people to think about. There's a few real wisdoms you've shared there. So. Well, let's just in closing, let's look ahead. So, it's been obviously a great story we've unpicked with you of your career journey, and what an amazing story it's been to hear about. How about looking ahead for you guys? What's in store at Q Games? What are your thoughts on where you might be going for the next 20 years?
Well, I think a couple of months ago we relaunched a game called The Tomorrow Children. And we managed to get the IP back from Sony and stuff, and we got it published under our own name. But that gave us a taste of how much power we have when we when we make our own game and then publish it ourselves. And there's a lot of power and a lot of fun in the directness of that. And I think in the future as well, I'd like to kind of do more of that. With Q Games, a little bit more sort of publishing and marketing of the games we're making, but also at the same time, I don't mind kind of branching out, to other areas. And we at the moment we have some sort of top secret stuff we do for say Sony corporate rather than PlayStation and stuff like that, which is sort of research into things that aren't typical games and stuff like that, and I kind of like that kind of experimentation as well. But at the same time, right now in the office right now, we're having a 2-week game jam, which is for the people who aren't involved in the games industry, they probably don't know what that means, but they probably imagine like jam on toast. But like it basically it means in 2 weeks, everybody has to try and make a fun game in multiple groups of people. So the whole office is kind of involved. So by the end of next week, you know, they'll just be like 5 or 6 games that would have bubbled up out of that process. And we get to like play them and test them, and then maybe we show them at like Bit Summit next year, or maybe we develop them further. You know, we can push them further and actually release them under our own label and that kind of thing.
Wow.
So that kind of creative stuff, I think, is really good. And so I kind of see that, and developing the Bit Summit event itself as well, and trying to push that even broader, keeping it independent, all about independent gaming, but also trying to like just build up the interest in that, build up the buzz even more, but stuff like that. So in general, I mean, right now Q Games is in its like 22nd year, so we're past our 21st birthday, and you know, for the next 10 years at least, I think we'll just keep on like the same path where we're always exploring like new opportunities and technology, and trying to merge them together and trying to make like interesting kind of new looking games of some kind.
Yeah,
very much in that kind of spirit.
It sounds awesome. It sounds really good. And actually, just taking that one step back, talking about the sort of summit, the conference that you organize, if we're provoking people's interest in that, is there somewhere they can go to find more about that online? Is there a dedicated website or a page on your website or something?
Yeah, if they search, if they do a Google search for Bit Summit, BITSUMMIT, it'll come up with the site. Yeah,
brilliant. We'll put the link next to the video as well on the Japan website. And Holly, how about for you then? You were obviously at a different point. You're a year into your experience working with Q Games and 6 months living in Japan now. What are your visions on the future for you? Is it just taking more in for the next period of time and learning and developing, or do you have thoughts on what you'd like to be involved in?
Yeah, all of the above. And as Dylan said, as Q Games, we've dipped our toe into the world of self-publishing. My background is in publishing, so it's something that I've been doing for a long time, and getting to do that with Q on the first title that we've fully self-published on PlayStation. Oh no, we self-publish Dead Hungry?
We did, but it's a smaller title, wasn't it? Title. So this is like the first real big kind of title.
Yeah, so having a full release come out, and it's been amazing getting to work with the whole team across every discipline. I'm getting to talk to our programmers every day. I'm talking to our directors. I'm talking to Dylan about what he's programming. He's been back programming on the Tomorrow Children, which is awesome.
Oh yeah.
So it's been
getting
really
back into
fun.
the programming there.
Yeah, everyone's really just been chipping in. And the thing that I love personally is being part of a small company where you get to be aware of many hats and you get to make quite a big impact. And you're not just shoehorned into your little area that you might know it really well, but you also get to talk to other people and learn from them. So for me, I'm really looking forward to doing more of that here at Q. And we recently announced another one of our games, which is actually part of the Pixel Junk series, which just celebrated 15 years. Actually.
Oh yeah.
So another long-standing Q Games IP. So we've just announced Pixel Junk Scrappers Deluxe, which is coming to PC. And we've got some really exciting things happening there behind the scenes. So very busy on that. And as Dylan said, a bunch of top secret stuff that we can't really talk about.
Way too much.
Yeah, too many things to list. We don't have time. But yeah, continuing to do that and, exploring more of Kyoto. There's still so many places that I haven't
even for
seen.
me, like after 30 years, I'm still finding all kinds of stuff in Kyoto. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I've got this vision of the two of you out there on your bicycles cycling around.
You're not too far off, you're not too far. Yeah, the advice that Dylan gave to me when I joined, like the big piece of advice he gave, he said, when you get home, get on your bike and just cycle. And I was like,
in one direction, right?
I was like, cycle
just
where?
One direction. Yeah.
He was like, just cycle.
Yeah.
And I was like, where am I cycling, Dylan? Where am I? He was like, no, really, just trust me, just go. And I did it. And it is great advice for anyone, even who's just coming to Kyoto on vacation or anything. Kyoto is so beautiful, and there are so many interesting things to see, even on the back streets near my house, just in a little suburban neighborhood. So many beautiful things to see if you just cycle off in one direction. So more of that. I'm going to be cycling off in more random directions and trying to see more of the city.
It's crazy because, you know, like, little tip for people, but like in Kyoto, there are more 3 Michelin star restaurants than in the entire of the UK.
Wow. Seriously?
Yeah,
Really?
yeah.
Gosh, that sums
like,
it up perfectly,
and quite often, so if you cycle around and you see these little neighborhoods, they'll just be, suddenly there's like a really good restaurant or a really nice looking bar or just a fun like knick-knack shop of some kind, and you just go in and you just explore, and they're all over the place, you know. Because the other interesting little side thing at the end, but like zoning in Japan is very, very good. So they do have some slight zoning, but it's not like the UK or America where, you know, it's a residential area, so you can't have shops. You know, in Kyoto, it's much more mixed together,
right?
And the zoning is more about like the height of buildings or the like. Obviously, you can't put a factory in a residential area, but like for regular shops and other kind of commercial businesses and offices, even there's no real zoning, and so it means that everything's a much more intermingled.
Yeah,
and it means that you don't get these like fixed zone areas that you have to go by car everywhere to get to.
Got you.
Instead, you get little little clusters of areas, which
Yeah.
are all mixed. So you have like its own community almost in these areas.
Sounds lovely. I mean, it reminds me of the old days here in the UK when you used to have these little clusters and you had your bakery in the corner shop. And,
exactly. And I think the UK should get back to that if they can, really, because it works. It works. You can't really have a factory, obviously, in, you know, they don't let you do that here either. But like for everything else, you know, have at it, you know, and it works.
If you guys are not signed up by the Kyoto Tourist Board already, you're doing an amazing job of selling Kyoto. It sounds so lovely, and I've been lucky enough to go.
Amazing. Talking of bakeries as well, Kyoto has the best bread and they have so many bakeries. It's crazy, absolutely crazy. All different types. It's just mad.
You'll be doing a good job of creating now Japan is opening up again for inbound tourism. I think there'll be a few listeners to this podcast probably coming and knocking on your door and Well, listen, guys, I'm aware of the time. It's been an awesome discussion, really good, and we've covered so many wonderful topics. You know, we've learned more about the games sector in Japan and what's going on there, but much wider than that. And it's a lovely contrast talking to the two of you. You know, Dylan, a wealth of experience there, and some amazing adventures you've been on during your career, and Holly at an earlier stage, but nevertheless, how exciting for you! What a great step you've taken, and a great job you've landed there, and you're clearly embracing it and making the most of it. And thank you both for sort of sharing all those experiences with us. There's so many takeaways for our listeners to tap into. So I'd just love to sort of wrap up by thanking you both so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to meeting you both in person at some point when I'm over in Japan too. So thank you both. And just to wrap up for everyone sort of listening in, wherever you're listening or viewing this podcast, you know, thank you for staying with us. It's been a long one, much more than I anticipated, but we've got so much good stuff out of it, and the time has just flown by, which has been really good. Just a message again to say, please subscribe. There's more of this sort of content coming down the line. Hit that like button if you've enjoyed this conversation and got value from it. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Dylan, Holly, thank you so much. Appreciate your time. And thanks everyone for listening in today. Thank you. Bye now.